Well, good evening. It is time for Economics Unbound yet again. Hello, Nana, and hello, dear viewers. Thanks for tuning in. Well, we have an interesting late evening ahead of us. Nana, are you in a bad mood? I said Molo.
No, I'm not in a bad mood. I am in a thoughtful, quiet, and pensive mood. I'm thinking about the collapse in the application of the Black Economic Empowerment Codes and strategies to de-racialize the economy. I'm thinking about just how sad it is that the statistical picture shows that the same demographic groups that enjoyed the benefits of this economy during apartheid are the same groups enjoying extraordinary benefits today, meaning BEE has come to naught.
Well, Nana, not exactly. There are some people who did benefit and some progress was registered. But yes, Nana, in the late 1990s, at a conference of the Black Managers Forum held in Stellenbosch, a delegate rose from the floor to propose the establishment of a Black Economic Empowerment Commission. The proposal so tabled was carried and accepted, and Cyril Ramaphosa, now president, was appointed to head up the commission. Now, much research and thinking went into the process. Nana, I'm happy to tell you that I too, in this regard, did my civic duty and participated till the very end, and was present when the Commission presented its report to government at the Sandton Convention Center in the early 2000s. What do you think, Nana?
Yes, Tans. I read that in 2003, a strategy for broad-based Black economic empowerment was released, which defines BBEE as an integrated and coherent socio-economic process that directly contributes to the economic transformation of South Africa and brings about significant increases in the numbers of Black people that manage, own, and control the country's economy, as well as significant decreases in income inequalities. Thus, the BEE process will include elements of human resource development, employment equity, enterprise development, preferential procurement, as well as investment, ownership, and control of enterprises and economic assets.
Well, Nana, you've really defined that really well. Yes, indeed, that is the case. The Black Economic Empowerment Act came into being based on those 5 categories of empowerment. The different components, just to repeat, are enterprise development, where we encourage people to develop enterprises and businesses. Equity, where people buy into already existing companies, like a slew of deals happened on the JSE, especially after 2003. Employment equity, that is where you have affirmative action in the workplace. Preferential procurement is where the state prefers to procure to Black people and women and those categories of the population that they seek to affirm. And then we have human resource development. That is basically education and skills development to deal with the apartheid backlog on the education score.
So far, so good. What then went so horribly wrong? I understand deal flow dried up to a trickle, if that at all. I understand that preferential procurement led to rampant illegal and illicit rent-seeking and human resource development. Well, to understand the disaster there, just look at the problems of access to higher education and the fees must fall movement. Enterprise development, well, that was a bit of a flop now, was it not?
Well, Nana, it's not as devastating as you're making it out to be. Nana, I always have to warn you that in economics, as in all life, we have to stick to interpreting credible information and data and not making too many glib generalizations. But you know, Nana, sadly, I think the data itself will indicate that you are not too far off the mark.
Analysis of the Department of Labor's employment equity data for the past 10 years shows there has been a decrease in the number of Black people in top management and a marginal increase of senior managers. It also shows that between 2015 and last year, the number of Black business owners has decreased from 33.5% to 27.8%. In 2007 to 2008, there were 18.8% Black people in top management, and 10 years later, there are 14.3%. In senior management, there has been a slight 4% increase of Black managers. The data also shows that there have been a decrease in white people both in top management and senior management by 0.5% and 9.1% respectively. The same data shows that only 3.3% of listed companies have a level 1 BEE certificate. The commissioner of the broad-based black economic empowerment, Zodwa Nduli, blames this on government. She says the reason companies have got away with not transforming is because government has not been playing its part. She says government needs to be able to say that if a company is not a particular BEE level, then they won't do business with them. She further says government is the largest procurer of goods and services. So if government can have its house in order, comply with the act, and refuse to do business with any company without a highest BEE level, then companies will then start taking transformation seriously.
How many companies do you know that are just not even interested in transformation, and they've got, if you go on the central supplier database of government, they're one of the top 100 companies that are getting business from government?
Yes. Government of 10.
Exactly. So now we must understand exactly what is it that we mean by the triple B legislation and why it's there. So if you look at it, there are certain reasons why it was structured like that. So it is leveraged on business with government. So now government must effectively ensure that if you are not transformed, you're not going to get any business from it. You're not going to get any license from government if you're a mining company, for instance. You're not going to get any concession, or you're not even entitled to get into a private-public partnership with government. That's what this means. So in 2003, this legislation was set up. But when we engage with government ourselves, government itself does not know that it actually should be doing that.
Tans, I just cannot wait for us to get into the discussion with the architects of this BEE model and ask them if they should be re-advising Mr. Ramaphosa, as it is time for BEE 2.0, or scraping the whole thing, or indeed going back to the drawing board after a good mea culpa discussion.
Well, indeed, Nana, I am joined here in the studio by Gabriel Kraus, an associate at the Institute of Race Relations, and Luvuyo Madasa, an executive director for Reimagine South Africa. Reimagine SA, he calls it. Good evening and welcome to the SABC. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming and joining us on this. I think it's an exciting discussion. It's one of those critical discussions at the heart of our economics and at the heart of our politics indeed. How do we deracialize this economy? Now, it seems to me also that from the post-apartheid period, the economic history has got three basic phases. The first phase, where we were building up the policy network, the policy mix, and that is the Nelson Mandela phase. And then in 2003 up to 2008, there was a period of growth, and during that period of growth and relatively lower interest rates, we saw a lot of BEE activity picking up in all sectors of the economy, especially in the financial services sector. We saw all those mega deals. And then after the economic downturn, the global economic crisis, we saw a petering out of deal flow and economic activity on the BEE side. Now, how do we make sure that BEE continues regardless of the cycles in the economy, or is it an impossibility, and that BEE has to mirror the cycles that the economy is going through?
I'll jump in there and say that at the Institute of Race Relations, we think that there is an alternative way of realizing the same goals. I think sometimes when people are critical of BEE, there's this impression that they don't want the injustices of the past to be undone. They don't want millions of poor black people to enjoy the dignity of work and a better future and better prospects. They kind of just want to keep the foot down. That's not at all our interest. We think that you can share the goal, but have different ideas about what it takes to get there. We propose that a better way to get there is EED, empowerment for the economically disadvantaged. And the thought there is
And
instead
what does
of...
that mean exactly?
So in principle, it means that instead of trying to help people out on the basis of race, where you might find that you end up helping out a lot of black people who are already extremely advantaged and have their hands on the levers of power, you go directly to help people that are poor. We think that the biggest inequality in this country is not between black and white, but rather between those who have a job and those who don't have a job. So the mission is to boost the economy, to boost employment, and to directly inject funds and development to those people who don't have work and don't have a good chance of getting there.
Please weigh in, Luvuyo.
So while I agree that the policy hasn't been as impactful as it could be, I'm concerned about the idea of renaming and putting more investment into another policy that may or may not be well received. What we're unfortunately not dealing with in this particular context is the reality that there are human beings that are expected to apply these policies. And in a lot of these discussions around whether or not the policy should be amended, changed, I think the BEE policy in its current state is in its third amendment. Those amendments continue to happen because captains of industry aren't applying an inclusive mindset when it comes to the organizations that they have. So unfortunately, in the here and now, there is a very close relationship to people who are currently not given access to the economy with that of the racialized reality of South Africa. It is unfortunate, but it is a tool that we currently have. And I think a potentially different approach would be engaging the policies in a progressive manner. How do we insist that organizations integrate this policy into their core business strategies? What tends to happen...
Are you speaking about another amendment, and yet you're critical of the constant tinkering with the policy? Aren't we speaking about a complete rethink, a complete overhaul of the BEE model that we are operating on?
My suggestion would be a complete overhaul of our approach to it. So in all earnestness, if we are honest about the economy as it currently stands, those that have don't want to share. And the question becomes, a policy, regardless of what you name it, how is that going to influence those individuals in terms of starting to embrace their fellow citizens in their capacities and engaging the policy in its intent? So if you look at the BEE policy in the big fish mindset, of course, it has benefited a select few who have close proximity to those relationships and skill sets, and as such continue to benefit from it. But when we start looking down at the value chain, the question becomes, how do we progressively engage the SMME sector and start looking at how to integrate the actual skills development into the very different or the very many deal opportunities that you speak to?
Well, you're talking about the two spokes, enterprise development and skills development, and you're talking about greater integration between those two spokes in the previous model. But what about the other three spokes? What about the equity level, the fact that the deal flow is just about non-existent? And what about the preferential procurement that lent itself to a slew of rent-seeking exercises? And remember that rent-seeking in economic terms is defined as an attempt to increase your share of wealth without creating additional value. Basically, it's extraction without production.
So I like that example that you give. It's a very sophisticated way of saying human beings are tampering with the code. Because what you're speaking to in that space is the fact that individuals are saying, I want to participate. BEE works in so long as I'm involved, and there's no consideration as to how to continue advancing those businesses and the skill sets and the integration. So you were speaking to ownership, equity, skills development, management control, enterprise and supply development, and the socioeconomic development elements. Those are the 5 that currently exist. The way that those elements are currently engaged, it is what is the best case scenario for us to get the points as maximum as possible with doing as little as possible. Now, in that conversation, we're not engaging the actual advisors to these very many corporates that are helping them circumvent the codes as they currently stand. We are having a debate that is speaking about the policy, which is in black and white. It has no necessarily morals around it, and we're not engaging the human beings that are expected to apply the policy in the spirit of the actual code.
Luvuyo, the theory would say that you have to look at rent-seeking itself, and that the model induces negative economic behavior. Remember that rent-seeking results in the reduction of the amount of wealth available, and it can lead to inducing regulatory capture. And when we have a captured state, we are surprised, because the theory told us long ago, I mean, the theory was developed by Anne Kruger in 1974, that you are likely to have national economic failure if you fail to reckon with the fact that it can induce manipulation of the political system as well as the levers of power and economic distribution. Please weigh in.
Yeah, so I think that's right. I think it's really good to think that if you had better people, then everything would turn out better if you've got the same rules and the same system. But I think, unfortunately, if the system is sort of geared in this kind of way, it disposes the not better people to get in charge, and if they do get in charge, it disposes them to be powerless. An alternative way to look at things is you want a system where even if you have bad people in charge, they're forced to do good things. So one way we think that you could contribute to that through our EED proposal is, in terms of skills development, to have a voucher system. So we think the state, rather than sort of at school level choosing what schools you go to and running those schools and having SAT to sort of protect teachers that don't show up to work, the state should take that money and give that money to parents in ways that can only be redeemed at schools. Then they can choose, do I send my kid to this government school or that government school or this low-cost private school, because we've got a lot of new low-cost private schools that are doing really well. You create that competition, and that means even if you've got a bad headmaster at one of these schools, they're forced to do good work if they want to hold on to their student body. You can do the same thing at university level. We think businesses in the EED program should be given points, EED points, for the amount that they invest to top up vouchers so that people can get skills development.
What is the basic theoretical premise upon which your proposal rests?
The basic theoretical premise is that in order for South Africa to create jobs, it needs to create value. It needs to add more value. That means that you need to do whatever it takes to incentivize all of the economic actors to engage in the most value-add activity that they can, rather than, as you say, rent-seeking. And that applies to black and white, and particularly when it comes to skills development, people want to add value, but they can't. It means the government needs to inject directly and incentivize businesses to invest directly into skills development. So one of the worries is, if you abandon BEE and take up a race-blind program like EED, isn't that going to mean that you just leave most black people behind?
In fact,
and
that's what I was going to say, that I don't see how your proposal would get us away from a society where the face of advantage and privilege is white and the face of disadvantage and economic deprivation is black. I cannot see how the levers you're suggesting, in a situation where you've got zip code apartheid in the schooling system, you go to school next to where you live, and where you live is determined by your levels of privilege as a person. In the traditional white areas, many of those schools have remained predominantly white. Don't see how the coupons can work, and I don't see how it fundamentally overhauls how we think about how to transform this economy so that the benefits are no longer racially skewed.
So I think that in terms of, you said two things. One is that the face of privilege is white, and the other is that the face of poverty is black. I agree with the second. Most unemployed people are black. Most impoverished people are black. 20 million black South Africans live on state-owned land that the state won't give up. I totally agree they're being let down. In terms of the face of privilege being white, I beg to differ. New World Wealth did a survey which found that, did a thorough study which found that high net worth individuals, that's people who own $1 million or more, 16 million rand, 15 million rand, there are more black people in that position than white people. I was recently in Hilton College, one of the country's most expensive high schools. I saw about as many black students as I saw white students, with sort of parents paying for them to get there.
I tend to dispute those kind of statistics.
But in terms of sort of the spatial apartheid question, competition is the way we think to incentivize people to go and put their schools where there currently are no good schools. So if you have a voucher system and you have a community with 5,000 kids, and each one of those kids is getting X amount of money from the government every year, let's say 25,000 Rand, sort of what it's spending on students anyway, something like that, that's a lot of money that an investor, that a capitalist, that an entrepreneur and a visionary, black or white, stands to gain if they can go and establish a school and have those vouchers be used to reimburse them. And then those parents get to choose which is doing better for my children. Now, the Institute has done surveys, and we found 93% of South Africans would prefer the voucher system, but it's not being talked about because the ANC and the EFF talk up sort of race-divisive policies.
At the
we
top
also
of our
find
society, we have a sort of a cappuccino situation.
we have a president, we have Patrice Motsepe, we have a lot
Give
of...
me an opportunity to explain.
I beg your pardon.
We're talking about a society where white privilege is a reality unless we're going to go down the route of denying the existence of white privilege.
No,
For most South Africans, the face of privilege is white and the face of disadvantage is black. Now, we have to start from that premise if we want to deracialize our economy. If you look at the JSE, and if you think of it as a microcosm of the representation of the rest of the society, black ownership, not counting the pension funds, big pension funds, is minuscule, and that needs to be remedied. Weigh in on this, please.
So I think that the difficulty is that it sounds as though the proposition is replacing a scorecard with vouchers. And the accountability mechanism is still a matter of saying, we know who those rent seekers are. The question becomes, how do we develop a stronger sense of holding them accountable and start driving the principles for what they're intended to do? So we're here having a discussion around, let's overhaul the policy, consider a number of different approaches that may or may not work, at the expense of time and more resources that are going to go into the researching, the consultants, you name it, that then put the policy together. And you're still dealing with the same group of human beings that, if they believe that this is not to their benefit, may choose to either engage or disengage from the policy. And I think the question becomes, how do we start demanding a sense of accountability where it matters? And I think that's what's most lacking, in the current policies as we are. Your point that you made around the JSE and the listing, we know who those companies are. We know where they sit, and we know the varying different transformations in those organizations. Unfortunately, for very many people in those institutions, they are either pushed to the side when they push the agenda of transformation, or not necessarily given the opportunity to grow as much. So for very many people who are in that space, they end up sitting and becoming those rent seekers because it's more beneficial to them and their families.
I have to ask you each one last question because we're completely out of time. If we were to reduce the cost of capital, now to start the interesting debate, would more black people be able to climb on?
So yes, the cost of capital.
Yes or no, and we have to be fast.
In so long as it's paired with skills development, yes.
And your view?
Well, it depends entirely on how you reduce the cost of capital. One way to reduce the cost of capital is to sort of take something that's working and break it, and then it's cheaper, but then it's not adding more value.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. That was Gabriel Kraus, an associate at the Institute of Race Relations, and Luvuyo Madasa, an executive director for Reimagine SA.
In economics, you get what you incentivize. You design your economic environment through policy, but I guess, Thandeka, there's something to be said for unintended consequences.
Indeed, much of what transpired in the BEE space was unintended, like the rampant corruption, the rent-seeking, and the narrow base of the usual suspects wasn't anticipated by the designers. But if society can act in the true spirit of BEE, and if policy can do its part, we might be able to transform this economy in the next generation. Good night, Bonandini.